Welcome everybody to the Master of Psychology Programs Information Night. So what I'm going to do is talk about the 3 psychology postgraduate programs, starting off with some general comments about them and then about all of them specifically. And then we'll go to questions and I'll defer to my colleagues here when necessary. So here's Dr. Lindley Denson, who's going to talk about the Clinical Masters, and Dr. Neil Kirby, who's going to talk about Organisational and Human Factors. Okay. And after that, of course, you can come and talk to us. So what I want to start with is really to talk about how postgraduate programs are quite different. If you've only had experience of undergraduate, there's a kind of significant leap in the way we do things which is quite different. So basically in our Master of Psychology degree, we're aiming to provide graduates with the qualification to become a professional psychologist, and that's indicated by being generally registered as a psychologist. This is a legally protected title and it's a legal requirement. As well, there's a second level in which each stream leads to a specialisation, or endorsement is actually the correct term. So it gives you the preparatory work necessarily after some additional 2 years of supervised experience to be endorsed as a clinical health or organisational psychologist, and therefore to be eligible for the colleges of the Australian Psychological Society. So what we aim to do is provide thorough theoretical and practical skills in the core areas that you'll need in order to enter the profession of psychology as determined by its accrediting bodies. So to start with, a very important thing is right at the start of entry to one of these programs, you actually have to register. You register as a provisional psychologist. So psychology is administered or regulated really by the Psychology Board of Australia, which in itself is a part of what's called AHPRA, Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Authority, and that regulates all about 14 health professions. So they're interested in you right from the start of entry because you're on your way to becoming a professional psychologist. So an important thing to do is actually, as soon as people are accepted into the program, they actually need to go and register with AHPRA as a provisional psychologist. And unfortunately this costs money too, so you have to register $431 a year. And AHPRA also requires that then trainees have to renew that annually. So basically you are under their regulation and supervised by us in the university. And so after 2 years completion of the program, trainees then make the transition to becoming a registered psychologist. And after that point, if you then are trained in the basics of the endorsed area and you have 2 years supervised experience, you can then go on to become at an endorsed level in clinical health or organisational at our university. There's a range of other endorsements in psychology that are possible. So an important thing to recognise is you're actually starting to join a profession rather than just doing a course. And so this fact explains some of the difference between this and undergraduate or other degrees. So firstly, there's a national curriculum. So there's a called APAC, Australian Psychology Accreditation Council, actually specifies the core competencies and curriculum that all programs which aim to prepare people to be registered as psychologists around the country have to adhere to. So they may do it in different ways, but they have to fulfil all these requirements. Second thing is, there's no way around it, this is quite a heavy workload. So the graduate program is, probably most people find it fulfilling, but they do find it stressful, but it's satisfying because they know they're on the way to actually becoming a professional. So there's a lot of work. I'll get to that in a bit more detail. And because of that, because you're assumed to be prepared for registration, therefore you're assumed to have covered all the requisite knowledge, therefore In what we provide, we have compulsory attendance, unlike undergraduate degrees. So a sizable part of a postgraduate program is also in supervised placement, so actually doing the work and being supervised by a experienced member of the profession. There are things like signing a code of conduct, so it's a set of values that you adhere to as well. Also, we have training in professional practice and ethics, and there are also some other regulatory things. So in some placements, or most of them actually, there's a requirement to have a police check previous criminal records, and you're required to do some extra training for mandatory notification, because these are related to the laws that govern professions such as psychologists. So you're actually joining a profession, and what's a profession? This is an occupation that regulates itself through systematic required training and collegial discipline. It has a base in technical and specialised knowledge, and it has a service rather than a profit orientation. And importantly, it's enshrined in a code of ethics. So being a professional in some ways gets you more rights, but it also brings more responsibilities. Just ask members of other health professions. So it's both a privilege, but that privilege carries responsibilities. And that's the reason why I guess postgraduate degrees are more regulated and controlled, and we insist on a lot more things than you would do at undergraduate. So, of all the master's degrees, how's it made up? So 44% coursework in 7 courses, and so these are designed to give you basically the content in order to enable you to then learn the craft and practice out in supervised placements. The coursework, there are some things in common with all the psychology streams, and there are some that differ, because it's preparing people for both a general registration and also for the possibility of going on to an endorsed area afterwards. So placements, the basic requirement is at least 1,000 hours of unpaid supervised practice in 3 or more placement settings. So it's a substantial amount of practice, which is needed and appreciated. One of the good things is talking to our graduates when they do get registered and they go out and realise they actually know something when they're employed to do a job. And it's very nice to have that. So placements are offered in numerous agencies and clinics depending on the specialty and the opportunities and so on. We have some connections to rural areas, and we're trying to increase that somewhat. And in some cases it's possible to do an international placement, although that really only works at the moment for the Organisational Human Factors Masters. So the 3 components are coursework placements, and the third is doing a Master's research project. And that's about the size of an honours thesis, but it's more applied in scope. So it's, yes, it needs to be much more related to practice. Or relevant PhD thesis, we'll get to that. That's a kind of a special category of combined degrees, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So how does the program set up? Unlike other undergraduate programs, we start quite early. So because there's a lot to learn and a lot of experience to be gained, we start earlier. So we commence in mid-January with an orientation session, and then the first classes we do in summer start right about the end of January. And from then on, really you can bank on working for about 2 years solidly, not the usual university holidays, but it's essentially treating it like a job, and so you can manage about 4 weeks of holidays a year. So it's another indication that you're going to a professional orientation. The first semester is particularly busy because there's a lot of preparatory coursework, and that's in fact why we start in summer semester in the end of January. So it would have already been giving you the impression, but it's quite demanding, and it's scheduled over then an extended academic year. So we'll then go close to Christmas, can get some sort of break, and then it might start again early the next year. An important thing is we need students to then time holidays through negotiation with us. That's because when we get to the placement activities, often they are scheduled to start at various times, and so as in given they're kind of like workplaces, or they are workplaces, most workplaces go roughly till the end of the year, so you can expect them to work in the same way. So if you're planning to take holidays, then just check with us. It's got to fit in with the requirements. And so you can expect, again, like a job, to get about 4 weeks of leave a year. So as another part of this being professional orientation, we require attendance at all classes if possible, because all materials essential to your ongoing preparation for professional practice. And so therefore class attendance is compulsory, and if you can't, then you again talk to us and we can make some other arrangements, but it's very important to attend classes and be part of the whole cohort. So another issue is, do you get credit for other things? And the answer is it's fairly limited, because the whole philosophy of it is to integrate study in new areas, so that's the coursework, integrate the research and integrate the practice together. So for that reason you can't really get much credit for previous research work. Even a PhD completed previously doesn't get you any credit, because the idea is research is also integrated into the master's program. You will get some credit for very similar master's coursework, and that's got to be negotiated again. Same thing is for placements. It is possible to get some credit, but again, there are rules around that. And if you really want to go into detail, you can follow the guidelines here, looking at the APAC website or the APS colleges. So the important thing is, what about the application process? So domestic applicants apply online via SATAC. And important information to write down is the deadline for those applications is 20th of October this year. And no late applications can be accepted. Now, a second part is you may apply for SATAC, but then you are directed to another website to provide additional information in the form of references. So this is administered by the heads of departments of psychology schools all around Australia, and they came up with this as a sensible way, given that people often apply to multiple programs. You basically pay a small fee and go on there once, and you need to let the people you want to do a reference know, and they will then log onto the website and put it there. And it then counts for wherever you might be applying to. So 2 bits really, SATAC application and then the referee process. Yeah, and once you've provided your referee details to that website, you need to let your referees know and let them know that they need to get it in too. And that needs to be done by around the end of October. Is it? Yeah. I did have that written down somewhere. Anyway, deadline for SATAC is 20th of October, and you should aim that your referees have their references done again by about the end of October. Okay, international applicants need to then go through a different pathway. That's through the international office. Another thing to add is, if you want to identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders, you can do this on your application form. And if you've got further questions on that, direct them to one of the coordinators, so Lindley or Neil, or the coordinator of the health program. Okay, the other thing to mention is there's another category, which is the combination of the PhD Masters program. So this is a even more demanding option, and this is essentially doing a full PhD combined with a Masters in terms of coursework, placement and training. And so this is really like doing 2 degrees. The only saving is that instead of doing a master's project, you've got a full PhD. And so this can be expected to take really a full 4 years at least, okay? And only for the highly organised and very dedicated. And you can do it in any one of the streams. So the difference with this is students need to be accepted into a master's first and then accepted into a PhD program as well. So it's a dual focus there.
Could I chip in?
Yes, absolutely.
So you need to apply for both at the same time. Don't apply for one and then the other. Apply for both now. If you're accepted into both, then you've got to combine the.
That's right, and for a PhD application you actually have to have a proposed program of study essentially, right?
And a supervisor.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Okay, some other things together. There's an English language requirement. That's not very surprising given this is psychology. This actually stems though because of regulation by APRA. So these are APRA rules, right? So first thing is you've got to be provisionally registered. I've said that. The other thing is the rules the Psychology Board of Australia has around this are very particular. And one thing they say is that if you didn't complete at least 2 years of secondary education in English in one of these countries, you need to provide your IELTS results. So that's your assessment of English literacy. And the standard is high, academic level 7 in all components. If you need to know more about that, have a look at the APRA website. Now, if you put in an application, the next thing is we then assess the applications, and then the second stage of it is to select people from interviews. So if you're offered an interview, then they're held in late November, and they will be offered once the applications have closed, and then we have access to the applications, the referee reports and the honours grade. So we then put it together, go through a selection, and we offer a set of interviews. And it's important to keep that. If anyone cancels their interview, we'll offer it to the next person on the list, so it's important to then be onto it and checking. For all SA residents, you need to attend a face-to-face interview, and overseas applicants can be offered a choice of face-to-face or Skype. We like interstate applicants to also attend face-to-face. So selection is based on academic results, on referee reports, and on the face-to-face interview. So I guess an important thing to consider is if you've been offered an interview, then it's all the other things are kind of evened out to an extent. So in other words, at interview you don't get points for having extra qualifications like a PhD. So it doesn't kind of give you a continual disadvantage. The same really goes for previous experience, which probably, as you're aware, it's quite desirable to have some voluntary or paid experience in things like psychology. So while we may look at those in assessing and offering interviews, once people get to the interview, that's taken as given, and the interview is pretty much the same for everybody. What you'll find, though, is if you've got some relevant experience, you're likely to be able to answer the questions of the interview in a more informed way from experience, right? So that's the advantage. But we don't, I guess what I'm saying is we don't give extra points for that at that stage because that's already taken into account. Some programs might do it slightly differently, but that's our practice. All right, so after the interviews, then we make offers, and they go out fairly quickly after interviews are completed. They will extend through December, and they'll go until all places are filled. So what happens, as you may be aware of, people apply to multiple programs, so sometimes then offers are made and people might go elsewhere, and then we'll go down to the next people and so on. So the process can actually continue over a while, even into January, and sometimes even up to kind of quite close to the start date of teaching, although that's unusual, but it can happen. Yeah. Other bit of important information is if you're offered a place in 2018, you can't defer it and retain it. So if you're offered a place, you need to take it up. Okay. Now, some other information. I've kind of said this, but let's just reiterate. So it's important that the School of Psychology gets your honours or diploma result by the end of October, because without these we can't then take it into account for selection or consider you for an interview. And you might need to check in advance if you're in another university than ours and ensure that your fourth year result can be provided to us by the end of October. And secondly, as I said, it's important that we get the referee reports also by the end of October. Okay. Now, after all that preliminary stuff, so we have 3 programs, and I'll just run through those in some detail. And then it's your chance to ask questions. So, clinical psychology. So what's this particularly about? The specialists in assessment, diagnosis and treatment of psychological problems. You may work increasingly in private practice, but traditionally at hospitals, university clinics, general medical practices, community health centres or community mental health. And the range of work can go across the lifespan with infants, children, adolescents, adults and somewhat with older adults, and this is an area that certainly needs to expand. So what do clinical psychologists do? In some roles they will do a lot of assessment and report writing. In some other settings they'll do much more intervention and treatment. But all clinical psychology roles require a person to be able to conduct assessments, write reports and conduct or refer for evidence-based treatments. Where do they work? Public facilities like Department of Health, Communities and Social Inclusion or DCSI, Drug and Alcohol Services, Commonwealth agencies, Medicare locals, and often general medical practitioners when people have got a bit of experience, often in private practice as well. So that's been an increasing and expanding area. So in the clinical psych program, what does it look like? So we start again at the end of January, and there's the 2 basic courses. So evidence-based practice is about the general ethical orientation, the philosophy of what you're doing, some thinking skills and so on, and that's paired with interviewing and intervention, which is about the first basic practice skills of interviewing, assessing and learning the basics of psychological intervention. So then in semester 1, which starts in about March, then there's the other core topics of psychological assessment, abnormal psychology, so this is about psychological disorders, and neuropsychology and disability. When we get to semester 2, much lighter workload and everyone breathes a bit of a sigh of relief. There's 2 courses, Health Psychology and Advanced Intervention, and at some point in semester 2 is often when people then start their first placement. The second year then is basically devoted to further practice and going on to developing the research project. So the research project you work as in honours with a particular supervisor, and you work through the whole year and then put that in at the end of the second year. So with all of that then people do 3 placements overall. Some of our graduates, Nancy Whittaker from a few years ago works for Correctional Services. Joanne O'Connor, who finished last year, she works with Child Protection at Flinders Medical Centre. Jasmine Turner went into a private practice position initially rather. She's now actually working in Royal Adelaide. So you can see quite a variety of different settings people might end up in. Our forebears, Dr. Constance Davey, who completed a PhD in London and returned here in 1924 and was appointed to the Education Department. So she's known for making profound contributions to the education of children, to women's rights, social justice and the education of psychologists and others. Okay, so that's the clinical stream. The second stream is the health psychology stream. So this is endorsed as a second specialist area in psychological practice. So there's overlaps with the clinical program, but the particular province of health psychology is about health behaviour and applying a model of so-called psychosocial model, biological factors, social factors and psychological factors, and how that interacts with people's experience of health and illness and how that interacts with healthcare provision. So you're looking at links between psychology, social factors and physical health. And then again there's two broad domains. So one is health promotion, so this is the preventative side. And clinical health psychology is more the end where people have got health problems and associated psychological difficulties. So health promotion is about promoting positive health behaviours, and this is often quite interdisciplinary, particularly involved with public health programs, so smoking, obesity, all of those things. Whereas clinical psychology is things like helping people to diagnose, help to cope with having a physical illness and all of the effects that brings with it. And so that can extend to areas like terminal illness, including the impact of loss and bereavement, and people with terminal illnesses in death and dying. So in health psychology you can work in, again, a broad range of different settings, from hospitals to GP clinics to bigger health providers or other providers of health promotion. Now the program structure, so there's quite a lot of overlap with the clinical program. You can see that a number of the courses are done in tandem. The differences are, of course, health psychology is about public health, so there's an introduction to epidemiology, that's the population prevalence and spread of different health and illness. And there's also one on health policy and public health interventions. And again, the placements are then much more specifically around health and health promotion, and the research project likewise. So who are some of our graduates? Taryn Loris works with the Royal Adelaide. So this is a clinical health role, and also does some health promotion work. Miriam Henke's another graduate from years past. And Kelly Hodder, who works at the University of Adelaide Counselling Service. Our forebears, Professor Helen Winefield, who has been here a long time, graduated in 1974 from this university and has stayed here and has educated many medical and dentistry students and countless psychology students. Continues to do so to this day, but not for much longer, so she's taking well-deserved retirement in a couple of months. Okay. So the final program is Organisational and Human Factors, headed by Dr. Neil Kirby there. Okay. So organisational psychologists, their real orientation is understanding organisations and how people work in them, both individually and groups. So some of their focus is on recruitment, on job design, on motivation, and ways to improve both job satisfaction and job performance. So therefore there's a big emphasis in the study of organisational behaviour. So organisational psychology includes training in management and human resource issues, and is about designing work and systems for the benefit of everybody, the employees and the employers. So competencies include things like developing an organisation, selection of people for them, training and development within organisations, performance management, looking at work-life balance, work attitudes, and action research and many other things. And I think an emerging area in that is really of coaching. Now this program has good links with the Defence Science Technology Group, DSTO. So good that they actually provide scholarships for some students. And that's a particular bonus for this program. So to have a student with them, and Neil can tell you more about that, that's a special scholarship available to people in this program. So the kind of careers that organisational psychologists do include managerial work, recruitment, consulting to organisations, human resource management, and on the other side, the human factors side, looking at job design and not only ergonomics but other human factors in the way of designing jobs to be better for people and more productive. Right, program structure. Again, there's some overlap because this is also a registered psychologist path. Some of the same programs of the other, same courses of the other programs, except you'll see things like human resource management, organisational behaviour, and contemporary issues in organisational psychology and human factors, of course. And again, the placements are then in organisational settings, and as is the research project, is orientated towards that. So there's been a large number of graduates over the years. Neil can tell you how many, I imagine. When Jan was one, so she's working in Housing SA. So this is a much more social public service role. Ben Carnell has worked with the AFL and is consultant in organisational psychology. Tara Swans is now a diversity manager in working with organisations around Australia to be aware of diversity issues. So you can see quite a variety of very different roles are possible. And our forebear, so this is a very famous man, Elton Mayo, completed his Masters in 1926, became a professor in Queensland and then moved to the United States to Harvard University. And he was involved in influential studies that looked at the effects of performance on work relationships between workers in groups and with management right in the 1930s, a very long time ago. And I think that's it.